Gen Z is generally pretty apathetic when it comes to politics, and honestly, who can blame them? I mean, have you seen the options they've had to choose from since they became old enough to vote? And even in this last election, when a lot of young men technically broke for Trump, it was definitely more of a, yeah, I'll hold my nose while I vote for the lesser of two evils thing than anything else. I mean, as a millennial, we at least had the hope, the inspiration, the sheer aura that came with Obama. The energy and enthusiasm amongst young people back then was absolutely incredible to experience, even if he didn't ultimately do that much in the end. And that's what it ultimately comes down to in the end. After the dust settles and all the confetti drops, you eventually just realize that the problems in this world run way too deep, and it doesn't matter who becomes president, nothing really changes. Obama couldn't save us, his opponents wouldn't have saved us either if they would have won, the next guy isn't going to save us, or the next, or the next. Now, Gen Z has already realized all this right from the jump, which is another reason I have so much respect for them. Democrats and Republicans both just suck. They're both useless, neither of them is going to do jack, and we all know it at this point. And it's just a total waste of life to put all your time and energy into politics, only to see that nothing really changed or mattered in the end. But a few weeks ago, something seismic happened that might just change all of this. You see, in New York City, the Big Apple, one of the most powerful cities in the entire world, Zohran Mamdani, a self-proclaimed democratic socialist, pulled off a dominant and transcendent upset victory in the mayoral primary against the useless boomer establishment Democrat Andrew Cuomo. And with the commanding lead he holds in virtually every poll, it looks like the runway is pretty clear for him to be the next mayor of NYC at this point. Now, the reason this is so significant, especially for Gen Z, is because for the first time, Gen Z flexed their political prowess and showed they're not just a bunch of apathetic and nihilistic 20-year-olds staying home doing nothing anymore. Their previous indifference towards politics was simply because we were giving nothing more than the same old establishment boomer elites from both sides of the aisle. But Mamdani has shown that once you can get them on board and sell them a clear vision, Gen Z can absolutely assemble and become a political force to be reckoned with. After Mamdani's convincing victory, the elite boomer establishment from both sides are in total panic mode. And I, for one, am absolutely loving it. Andrew Cuomo and all his corporate shills like the New York Times, supposedly left-leaning institutions, have totally lost their minds and have shown just how incredibly out of touch they are. And of course, the Fox News right is predictably having a meltdown and desperately trying to label him a communist in their typical dishonest Red Scare tactics. Now, the communist Red Scare tactics are something I have a lot of experience dealing with personally right here on this channel as well. Personally, I'm not a capitalist, socialist, or communist. I believe all of these systems are long outdated, and none of them have great solutions for the challenges we face, especially when it comes to the AI revolution. And I do have some concerns and skepticisms about whether Mamdani's policies will actually work, but we'll discuss that a bit later. But you may have noticed I critique capitalism in my videos way more. And part of the reason I do this is because although I'm not a socialist myself, I do find that socialists and even communists are at least honest and consistent with their arguments, even if I disagree with them. Capitalists, on the other hand, I find to be extremely dishonest and hypocritical in the way they argue, and as a result, the comment section always becomes a dumpster fire of pointless semantics. And so to prevent this from happening again, I'm about to go scorched earth on a few capitalist arguments I always see in the comments, because all I want at this point is an honest and productive dialogue around what's sure to be one of the most consequential elections of our lifetimes. Part 1, the hypocrisy. Capitalists are very good at controlling narratives and weaponizing language. I have to give them credit for that. For example, you're literally never allowed to utter the phrase, "that's not real socialism," anymore. Anytime people have tried to use that argument, capitalists howl like a werewolf, scream like a banshee, and throw a massive temper tantrum and hissy fit like a little baby, to a point where now they've essentially made it illegal to say, "that's not real socialism." Okay, fine. I wouldn't even have such a problem with that if not for the fact that anytime you point out all of the many problems with capitalism, they themselves didn't default to the exact same "that's not real capitalism" argument. That's corporatism, that's crony capitalism, that's oligarchy, and more recently, that's techno-feudalism. I mean, it's so hilarious to me that the same people who made it literally illegal to say that's not real socialism literally have come up with 1,000 different ways to say that's not real capitalism. So let's get to the bottom of this. The real actual definition of communism is a classless, stateless, and moneyless society where the means of production are owned communally. The definition of capitalism is an economic system based on the private ownership of the means of production and their use for the purpose of attaining profit. Capitalists will always use the basic Wikipedia definition of capitalism to justify anything bad happening under capitalism as not real capitalism, and that technically we've never had a real capitalist system, even though monopolies, cronyism, and corruption are a direct result of the capitalist system. However, at the same time, they've made it illegal to say that's not real socialism/communism, because even though we haven't had an actual communist state based on the actual definition of communism itself, everything bad that happened under communist regimes was a direct result of trying to get to that utopian communist outcome. You can't have it both ways. Either we're allowed to criticize the actual results of the system independent of the Wikipedia definition, or we're not. Either we're both allowed to say that's not real capitalism/socialism, or we're not. You can't make it illegal to say that's not real socialism, then cheaply cop out to corporatism, crony capitalism, techno-feudalism, or whatever new bullshit term you've invented so that you can keep claiming that's not real capitalism. It's important to clearly define these parameters so that we can actually have an honest and productive dialogue here. Hey guys, so I'm on a mission and I need your help. You see, I've made it the purpose of this channel to defend Gen Z from all these nasty, delusional Gen Z haters, and I've just realized we're starting to get close to taking down the most despicable one yet, the angry guy. This guy is not just another delusional old fart calling Gen Z lazy. He's literally had videos where he openly celebrates Gen Z suffering and even dying. He's just straight up a terrible, terrible human being. Now, thankfully, his channel is rapidly dying and we are rapidly gaining ground on him as we speak. So, if you're new here and enjoying this content, definitely consider subscribing and helping us take down the biggest Gen Z hater out there. The current goal is to surpass him in subscribers by the end of summer. With your help, we can absolutely do this. Part 2. Is Zoron a democratic socialist or a communist, actually? Okay, so now that we've gotten that all out of the way, let's take some time to clearly define what Zohran Mamdani's actual positions are, to see whether he's a democratic socialist as he claims, or a communist in disguise, secretly posing as something else to avoid the bad optics of the word communist. Now, to get to the raw truth of all this, I think it'd be helpful to quickly point out that a big logical fallacy we all make when discussing politics is that we like to think in terms of absolutes when politics exists on a gradient scale. There has never been a fully 100% private sector funded economy or a full-on communist state with no money. Even in the most conservative countries, everyone agrees that police and fire department services, for example, should be publicly funded and we should all pay into that. We shouldn't have situations where if someone's house is on fire, he has to personally pay out of pocket to a private fire department corporation to send over firefighters and extinguish the flames. And even in the USSR and full-on communist states, there were still elements of free trade and money. So, rather than asking if Zoron is a communist or democratic socialist, it's more helpful to have a gradient scale where on one end you have communism and on the other you have democratic socialism. And now you can ask the question, which one is he actually closer to? And let's answer this question using his actual policies, using actual facts and numbers, rather than resorting to cheap communist Red Scare tactics. Let's start with the issue of corporate taxes. So, on one end, we have the Nordic democratic socialist countries that have proven to be successful and prosperous. The corporate tax rate in Sweden is 20%. In Norway and Denmark, it's 22%. Let's just be generous and say 20% for now. Now, in actual communist countries, technically corporate taxes are not really a thing because the state or community owns the means of production. But for the purposes of this conversation, you can essentially think of it as a 100% tax rate. Now, Cuba is a communist country and a favorite poster boy example for Fox News right-wing types to be like, if you like communism so much, why don't you move to Cuba? Cuba recently has made some reforms to allow some free market autonomy for businesses, and thus they've lowered their corporate tax rate to 35%. So you can see where all these numbers lie on the scale, and this gives us a good, clear visual representation to see where Mamdani's tax policies would line up. So let's put all our emotions aside and just focus on the actual facts and numbers here. Based on how much both the establishment Democrats and Republicans are desperately trying to frame him as a communist, where do you think Zoran's tax policy would land on this chart? First off, in order for him to be more of a communist than a democratic socialist, his proposed corporate tax rate would have to be at least 61%. Now, if you want to use the more generous Cuba definition of communism, it would have to be at least 28%. Let's set these clear benchmarks in place before we even reveal his actual tax policy to make sure we're not reverse engineering labels onto him one way or another. I'm always going to be honest and objective. If it turns out that his tax rate is actually closer to that of actual communist states, I will full on start referring to him as a communist myself. But remember, his proposed corporate tax rate has to be at least 28% to fairly apply this label to him. So, after researching his actual tax policy, the actual facts and numbers, not the emotional name calling, it turns out Mamdani's policy is to raise the corporate tax rate from 7.25% to 11.5%. Yes, you heard that right. You can look it up yourself. It's true. And this is exactly what I mean by capitalists are being extremely dishonest. They've gone so far out of their way to smear him as a communist when his actual tax policies are barely even high enough to be considered a democratic socialist. He's actually quite a radical capitalist by Nordic standards. To put this into perspective, let's imagine he was campaigning in Norway right now to be the next president. Norway has a corporate tax rate of 22%. If he ran as a politician in Norway with the exact same corporate tax rate he's suggesting in New York City, he would have to convince the Norwegian voters that it'd be a good idea to slash their corporate tax rate in half. He would actually be thrown out as a radical anarcho-capitalist conservative in any actual democratic socialist country. He isn't even remotely within distance of the observable universe of being an actual communist. And once again, this is all based on actual facts, numbers, and percentages, not on stupid emotional name calling, which is pretty much the only argument capitalists are capable of, and to their credit, they are quite good at that. So if you're a young American Gen Z watching this, I just wanted to present you this information so you have some context on just how radically right-wing all of America is. We're talking about New York here, one of the bluest states in the bluest regions that have always and consistently overwhelmingly voted Democrat. And even New York City isn't even half as democratic socialist as the Nordics are. Part 3, skepticisms. Now, as I said, I always try to be fair and objective in my analysis. And so on that note, I do have to express some of my skepticisms on whether or not Mamdani's policies will actually work. It's not that they couldn't work on their own in a vacuum. Again, half the corporate tax rate of the Nordics is nothing, to be honest. But it's that capitalist corporations are so greedy that they'd rather leave New York City entirely than pay even slightly more in taxes. We already have many CEOs and billionaires threatening to leave, and I really don't see how he's going to stop them. We've spent a lot of time talking about the Nordics in this video, and as someone who spent a few months traveling there, I do have to say that the conservative critique that it only works in those countries because they're a small and homogenous group of people is somewhat valid. There is a strong social contract in those countries where people generally honor the unspoken rule that you don't abuse the system. A lot of them have had to reverse their previously open border immigration policies because it was proven to be unsustainable. So while a lot of his policies sound good on paper, it remains to be seen what effect they'll have in real life when he likely wins the NYC mayor election. Conclusion. A lot of capitalists like to say that policies that work in the Nordics wouldn't work in the States because our population is just so much bigger, amongst many other factors. But this is just speculation with no real evidence behind it. We don't know if it would work or not because it hasn't been tried yet. I'm not going to claim I know it's going to work because this is the first time we've tried something like this. But here's what I do know. We do know for a fact that this current system we're living in is not working. So I'm willing to give him a chance because a new system that may or may not work is better than the old system that we know for a fact doesn't work. Regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum and how you feel about Mamdani himself, there is one huge victory we can all celebrate in all of this. The days of Gen Z being passively nihilistic and unable to make any real-world impact are over now. They've sent a message that they're a force to be reckoned with on a national scale. They've woken up now. They're burning down the system that doesn't work for them. They're overthrowing the establishment elites and the status quo that have had far too much power for far too long. And their power is only going to grow exponentially more from here on out as boomers fade out and more young people come of age. Any politician from any political party better study this and take notes. All roads to any position of power go through Gen Z at this point. Now, in this video, we've talked about the wider political revolution that Gen Z has ignited. But if you want more practical tips on how you personally can beat the system and reduce your dependency on society on a more personal level, we made an entire video on how you can do exactly that right here. Check it out. I'll see you there. Thanks for watching.